Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Scotty D49 here with you once again for another installment of If You're New to the Hobby series. In this series, we cover off on all the basics of Warhammer 40k miniature wargaming and stuff that you can apply to other miniature wargaming as well, but specifically focused around Warhammer 40k. Today's installment, we're going to be looking at the worst 5 things you can do when you first start building Warhammer 40k army lists. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Number 1, solely relying on Battlescribe for both points and rules. Now, Battlescribe is a third-party app that a lot of Warhammer 40k players and many other miniature wargamers will use to create army lists or rosters for their game of choice. It's a nice, easy, quick third-party app that is managed by those communities. However, because it is managed by those communities, there is a time lag, and that means that new releases, you won't have the correct points in there for up to a week, maybe 2 weeks after. And then, being community managed, it's not authorized by Games Workshop, and they do get things wrong. 90% of the time, things will be fine. But it's that 10% of times where you go to reference a rule, or you go to reference a stratagem, or you go to reference points, and it's incorrect. However, it is a great tool nonetheless. What you actually want to be doing is using Battlescribe to draft up your army lists. So you kind of got the structure in mind, you know your detachments, you know what you're wanting to take, but before you even send through your army list to your opponent, or submit an army list for an event, or make sure it's all good to go and just assume that it's fine in the app, check your points. Go through your codex, go through the latest chapter approved, go through the latest FAQ errata for the points. Find them, make sure that the points of the army list that you've written up are all correct as per that as well. Physically write it out, what each unit's taken, and then that way you know for certain that the points are correct, I'm not over points, I'm not under points, and that also, if there's any rules, you've got your codex on hand, that you've also got the core rulebook on hand, so you understand how those interactions also occur during your games. Now, you should also be checking for your detachments and things like that as well, command points and all the alike, but we'll get into those in number 2 in just a second. Number 2, using more detachments than you need. Now, previously in 8th edition for Warhammer 40k, for a bit of context, the more detachments you took, the more command points you got to use. However, there were people that were taking detachments of bare minimum units to get more command points. You would have heard about maybe the Imperial Guard Lucky 32, or the AdMech Rusty 17. Those are just some of the examples of where people would game the system to take more command points. In 9th edition, it's reversed. So to actually take more detachments in your army after your Warlord's detachment, it actually costs you more command points. So you're actually losing in-game ability by taking more detachments straight off the bat. So this is a great incentive to use minimal detachments. If you're able to fit everything into one detachment, great, go for it. If you're able to make use of an ability that means that you need to take multiple detachments, like say you're taking a Deathwing detachment and a Ravenwing detachment for a Dark Angels army, then that is completely fine because they need to be separate detachments to get their special rules. Or, it could be a Real Space Raiders detachment, or, taking 3 patrols for Drukhari, your Dark Eldar, and you've got benefits there. However, if you don't have one of these benefits and you're taking multiple detachments, I'd be questioning why. You're spending more often than not 3 command points to take these kind of detachments. Is that really worth not putting those units in those detachments into your, say, battalion? Is it worth maybe shelling out the extra points to upgrade to a brigade if you've got the extra points available to do more troop choices? Can you split up the larger troop choices that you have to be able to accommodate for that? There is also other considerations. If you're taking multiple factions of Space Marines, for example, and say you're taking Raven Guard and White Scars in 2 separate detachments, you're going to need to be able to differentiate those models. If you've got them painted separately, one is purely White Scars, the other is Raven Guard, Perfect. They're identical chapters as per the detachment. You can tell them apart easily. One's predominantly black, one's predominantly white. Easy as it gets. However, if you're using them as a cohesive army that they're all painted the same, you're going to need some form of painting on them, whether it's the base rim, whether you've got some of those third 3D printed rims that you've chucked on them, elastic bands, skulls, whatever you decide to use to differentiate them, so they're not going to look as cohesive then at that point, because you need to be able to tell for your opponent. So there's all these different things that you have to consider when you're taking more detachments than you really need. Because if you're taking multiple codexes even, your army's actually going to be losing out on abilities for one codex or another. You know, for Space Marines, I know that if you take multiple detachments of Space Marines, you're fine, but if you take multiple armies, multiple different codexes, then the Space Marines will lose abilities, and more likely than not, the other codex will also lose abilities as well. So it's also an argument to say stick with one codex, if at all possible, when building your lists as well. Number 3, building an unbalanced list. By building an unbalanced army list, generally what this will look like is you're putting more points and more focus on one particular aspect of your army, whether that's going to be characters, whether that's going to be anti-tank shooting or anti-horde shooting, anti-infantry shooting, or whether you're more close combat orientated around dealing with vehicles in that manner, or you're focused more on deep striking units, all these different areas. If you take more than you need in that area, you're going to draw focus away from the others that need attention, and that way your army is going to be lacking in that spot. It's what we call an unbalanced list. Now, what you want to aim for, at least initially, is something I've heard many times over the years in my Warhammer 40k experience, is called the TAC list, or the Take All Comers army list. This list is designed with everything in mind. So these things could be your objective scoring, both in 9th edition, your primary and your secondary considerations. Your mobile and alternative deployment for secondaries, for example, deploy scramblers. You need to be able to get into the midfield and into your opponent's deployment zone. Now that objective has changed as per the GT Mission Pack for 2021 that is about to be released at the time of recording. So there are these objectives where you do have to get to other places of the board, so you need that mobility. You also need to deal with infantry, and generally that's going to be in the form of lower strength, lower damage weapons. So anything between strength 3 to strength 6 shooting, damage 1 to 2 weapons. And then you've also got anti-vehicle and anti-monster shooting, which is generally your high strength weapons. Anything of strength 7 plus, that's going to be damage 3 or more. So it's either going to be flat 3 or flat 6, or it's also going to be a variable. It's going to be D6 or D3 damage. Now, you have to consider that as your core. You have to play to the mission more than your opponent, but you also have to try and stop your opponent by killing their units. It's just the nature of the game. So by factoring in each of these 4 core items, you will build a take all comers list. Now, if you have spare points after you think or you believe that you've covered off on each of these areas quite well, then you can focus on some of those added extras. Things like psychic characters or defenses, like a librarian for Space Marines or a Colexus assassin even, if you're an Imperium army. Or supporting characters, it could be more Cryptex for Necrons. It could be an Apothecary for Space Marines. It could be an Ancient. There's a lot of different supporting characters that you can take in the game now that adds value, that adds ability to your army to be able to survive or do other things. They're a bit more utility rather than just raw damage or objective securing or mobility, that those core 4 focuses you want to be focusing on. So really, as you're building your list, those are the core things that you should really be keeping in mind to build a take all comers army list. Number 4, not considering secondary objectives. Now, this one kind of flows on from number 3. If you're not considering at least 2 secondary objectives in 9th edition Warhammer 40k, then what you're likely going to be doing at the game is you're going to rock up, you're going to see your opponent's list, and then you're going to decide the 3 objectives that you want to take. You're not then planning in advance to have 15 to 30 points that you can control before you even get to the table. It means that you're leaving the full 45 up to what you're facing on the table against your opponent. So by building an army around at least one, if not two at best, secondary objectives, it means that you're going to be able to at least score some points if you've factored how to achieve those in. For example, you'll often see players take deploy scramblers and they have a method in their list to use it. Now, as I've already said, that one's no longer going to be a viable objective going forward in the new GT mission pack. There's going to be different ones that are going to require actions, or you're going to need to be in table quarters. It's things like that, considering mobility options if you're going to take engage on all fronts, considering other things like if you need to put banners down on objectives, then you're going to need to get to a lot of objectives to put them down and hold them as well. So things like that, those kind of secondaries. You can also factor in firepower for how much damage you can output to, say, vehicles or infantry for those style of objectives too. But by not considering your secondaries during your list building, you're actually going to put a lot of pressure on yourself. And if you consistently don't factor it into your list, by mispicking secondaries, you will end up losing games because of it. So by factoring it into your list, you have a greater chance of doing more scoring, but also a greater chance of winning games. And number 5, only using supposedly good units. Now, you hear on websites like Bell of Lost Souls, Spiky Bits, they'll do articles that'll say, this is the undefeated list from this event. And you'll see the units that are in there, or they'll say, oh, this is a really good unit to take. Or you hear someone in your local meta say, oh, I found this unit to really good effect. As you build up your collection as a new Warhammer 40k player, I encourage you to not chase the meta. Don't chase what is good. Chase what looks good instead. Because if you pick models purely off how they perform, then there's going to come a time where you have to build those models. You have to paint those models. And you mightn't enjoy it. You mightn't like the look of the model. You mightn't like the color scheme that you're having to paint it up in. Because if you're playing a specific chapter, or if you're playing a specific legion. Number 5, only using supposedly good units. Now, you may hear from articles online or from tournaments or from your local players that X unit's really good, X unit's overpowered because of this, or this is really good in conjunction with this. Now, whilst that is good, more often than not, you're not going to enjoy playing them. And here's why. If you just take that unit on its own, and you don't have those additional elements in your army to help support that unit do the best work it can in the game, or if you've got multiple of that one unit and you haven't got the rest of the army built around it to make them effectively do their job, then you're going to lose games. You're not going to have fun because you're not experienced enough to know how those units work together in unison. So, on the other side, I'd highly recommend using models that you like the look of. Follow the rule of cool. If you like the look of it, use it. For me, one of those units very early on was Sternguard Veterans for Space Marines. I love the rules. They were great fun to use, even though they're a bit pricey. And I'd take 5 of them and they get blown away. But you know what? I still put out those veterans and they were still able to do stuff from time to time. And it was great fun. And I didn't care if they got blown off the table because they were converted models that I did myself. So if you use models that you like the look of, that you want to use, you're going to enjoy the game no matter whether they get killed, whether they do their job, because you're focused around having fun and enjoying what you own, rather than trying to get this one key unit that's supposedly good to work and to do this miraculous job and win you the game by doing it. It's not going to happen. And it'll only come with time and experience and playing of games and just learning from your losses, from your wins, is how you gain that experience. It's how you know what things work, how things work together. But in saying that, don't ever stop using things you don't enjoy playing with, because as soon as you do that, you will slowly and surely lose your desire to have fun for the game, and you're just then effectively playing a more advanced version of chess rather than Warhammer 40k, because you're trying to build the most efficient list. You're trying to do the best possible list that you can do, the best possible at an event. Now, tournaments, yeah, sure, go for it. But in everyday play, you don't need to. So stick with what's fun, what you enjoy playing with, what you enjoy the look of, what you enjoy seeing on the battlefield, instead of following those supposedly good units. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope that those tips were maybe some things that you hadn't thought about, or maybe things you hadn't seen that you were doing, and that you'll be able to change what you're doing when it comes to building army lists, that you'll see, oh, I'm focusing too much on this one aspect and I need to focus on others, or I'm relying too heavily on Battlescribe for my rules. Things like that a lot of people don't necessarily think of, but it's an obvious thing when you kind of step back. But however, if there is something on the list that you disagree with, that you don't think should be there, let me know in the comments below. If you think there's something that should actually be on this list and isn't, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to discuss it with you, because we're all here to grow, to learn, and I'm here to help you grow and learn in your love for this new hobby of yours. Now, you can catch me live over on Twitch every Tuesday and Friday night and Saturday, where the details are in this description below for times, and yeah, hope to catch you live during the streams at some point. If you do enjoy this video and feel as though there's someone in your hobby circle that needs to hear some of this, feel free to share it with them as well. But apart from that, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Scotty D49, and I shall catch you in the next video.